Thank you, everybody. Hi, and welcome to this session on peer-to-peer organising as part of Organise 2020. I'm John Wood. I'm the digital manager at the TUC, working with our affiliate unions on our digital lab project. And I am really excited to be hosting this session with some great guests who've got a lot of insight to be sharing with us. Emma Rees is a brilliant person to have with us talk about digital organising. She was one of the original founders of the grassroots organisation Momentum. And she spent years developing new digital ways of building leadership and running campaigns. More recently, she's been working with the digital organising consultancy Social Practice, who work with organisations in the US and internationally, taking some of the cutting edge techniques out into the progressive movement. And we've also got two colleagues from UCU. Claire Maris works at University of London. She's a member of the local UCU branch exec committee, and she was elected this year to UCU's NEC. Nick Hardy is UCU's GS Assistant for Research and Strategy, and they're both going to talk to us about the great work doing using peer-to-peer SMS to get as many UCU members as possible to vote in ballots for industrial action and to beat the Trade Union Act's draconian new thresholds. So thanks and welcome to all of you who've come to take part here. I'm going to hand over to Emma now to help us set the scene on why we think this new organising tactic is going to be so important for unions. Over to you, Emma.
Great, thanks, John. And yeah, it's great to be here with all of you. As John mentioned, I was one of the co-founders of Momentum and worked as its national organiser for the first couple of years through the 2017 general election. And yet, since then, I've been working on lots of different progressive campaigns with various trade unions and progressive candidates and advocacy organisations, and really seeking to find ways to involve the mass participation of volunteers. And one of the most inspiring groups that I've worked with has been National Nurses United, the largest nursing union in the US, who have really been at the forefront of the fight for Medicare for all, the universal healthcare system in the US. And what I've been particularly inspired by is the way that they've taken a lot of the techniques that were developed and pioneered in whether it was the Bernie Sanders campaign or other electoral campaigns, and really integrated that into the nuts and bolts of how they've done their union organising. And one sort of great example of that is the rollout of the peer-to-peer programme, which I know that many UK trade unions and the TUC have been doing as well. And I do really think it's got a lot of scope to help expand the scope of union work and to really strengthen and support the organising efforts across the board. So yeah, I'll go into a little bit more detail on that now. So peer-to-peer, it literally means that you are having communications from peer to peer. So from, one trade union member to another trade union member. And it helps to overcome that challenge or the tension between top-down communications or one-to-many communications. So things like sending out large, emails to email lists or putting things out on social media, which is essentially a kind of a one-direction broadcast. And then on the other extreme, you have the more traditional one-to-one conversation, right? Picking up the phone or meeting somebody. And that nothing's ever going to really replace that, the one-to-one conversation. But the limitation of that is that there's only so many one-to-one conversations that can be had within a particular amount of time. And there isn't always the capacity there to really do that at scale. So the peer-to-peer texting tactic, I suppose, is a way to try to bridge being able to communicate with lots of people at the same time, but to not lose the kind of personalized aspect of it and the fact that it is actually a conversation. So with peer-to-peer texting, even though you're using a texting platform and you're sending lots of messages in one go, each message comes from a real phone number, and each message is sent by a real human being. It's not automated. And then when people respond to those messages, those replies are read by a human and replied to by a human. So that dialogue is really there. And I think this can be incredibly powerful for both people who are receiving these text messages, right? Because it's personalized, they can have their specific questions answered. It has that personal touch, they can get more information. But it also really helps to build leadership of the people who are volunteering, right? Who've taken that step up and are becoming sort of closer to becoming organisers of the campaign. Because, you know, they're playing a really, really vital role in the strategy, the union's organising strategy, and taking on that additional leadership responsibility. Yeah, and it's a way of really overcoming that tension, I suppose, between the one-to-many communications and the hyper-personalised one-to-one conversation. So when it's set up, and we'll go into some of the nuts and bolts of that a little bit later, but when it's set up, an individual can send approximately 200 text messages in a minute. So you can launch by clicking each individual message. You can launch 200 messages, and you're doing this on your computer screen, or you can also do it on a smartphone or tablet. And the reply messages will come in, and you've got pre-written replies, which are editable if you need to tweak them to respond to the specific question or response that you've received. And you can basically manage having those 200 conversations at the same time. So if you imagine, trying to have one volunteer to call 200 people, like in a matter of a couple of hours, it obviously wouldn't be possible. And I suppose the thing to say is that this is like a really core part of your organising effort of your union, and can be used really effectively for any sort of union organising work that you are looking to do. So I know we're going to hear some really great case study in just a moment around like strike ballots, and there's a huge scope to really use this tactic, I think, to support that industrial strategy that the unions have. An alternative, or like an additional thing that can be used for, is recruitment for particular events. So you could message people personally, asking if they're planning, to be able to come to a particular meeting or a particular union event. A great project I was involved in with the TUC last year around the McStrikes that took place was using the peer-to-peer method to also build support for community actions. So because the TUC had built up a list of people who weren't necessarily trade union members, but were people who had signed petitions through the various petition campaigns that had been run, and phone numbers as well as email addresses were collected, it meant that a lot of those people who are either trade unionists or supporters, right, allies, people who've signed a petition in support of workers' issues, were able to be contacted to ask them to support community solidarity stalls in support of the strikes. So the scope of this is huge, right? You can use the tactic for a whole plethora of different activities within the union. Just the last example that I'll give for now before passing over is so the National Nurses United Union, at the start of the coronavirus pandemic, they launched a health and safety survey tool, and they used peer-to-peer texting to send this out to nurses all over the US. And within a matter of days, and it was all about asking them, whether their hospitals were up to speed and had the necessary PPE. And obviously, sadly, regrettably, as we know, that was not the case, in the same way that it wasn't here. Within days, they had almost 9,000 nurses who'd replied, answering a comprehensive survey about the preparedness of their hospitals and their workplaces. And they had people from all 50 states, nurses from all 50 states who'd sent that back in. So again, it's just like that it shows that in those moments of crisis, or when there's a particular moment, it's a very quick and easy way to communicate with lots and lots of people at the same time, in a way that is kind of personalised, and the response rates are higher than with an email, which can obviously get buried in an inbox. So yeah, I'm going to hand over now to Nick and Claire, who are going to go into a case study, and then a little bit later in the session we'll go through some of the nuts and bolts as well. Thanks. Over to you guys.
Thanks, Emma. I hope everyone can see and hear me. That was a really fantastic and helpful introduction to the general kind of practice of peer-to-peer texting. So what Claire and I are going to talk about is how we've used it in UCU, as Emma said, to boost turnout basically and organise members in kind of national industrial postal ballots. But before I start, I'd just like to say a special thanks, not just to John for inviting us to this session, but also to Anthony Hayes at the TUC, who worked with UCU to get this project off the ground and was really indispensable in the early stages, working with our members and with our staff to do the first kind of pilot that we did of this. So the name of the peer-to-peer texting service we've been using, which I'd strongly recommend, is Through Text. It's US based, but it's possible to set up accounts in the UK as well, and as far as I know, around the rest of the world. I think we might be the first union in the country to use it really systematically in industrial postal ballots, basically. We've used it quite a lot so far. We first did it in a couple of postal ballots for national disputes, because we still in our higher education sector basically have national collective bargaining, which were running at the same time, these two dispute ballots, one on pensions, one on pay and pay related working conditions. We didn't do it in every branch that was taking part, because it was about 150 branches in total. So we targeted it at 18 branches in the first instance, then rolled it out a bit more generally when we did a round of reballots for branches that didn't make that 50% turnout threshold a couple of months later. We've probably texted so far about 10% of our whole membership. That's about 12,000 out of about 120,000 members. Now, in those first two ballots, just to give you an impression of how it can help, we had previously, in a ballot on pay and pay-related issues, our best result had been an average turnout across all branches of 42%. And in terms of the number of branches, because we ballot disaggregated usually, in terms of the number of branches making it over the threshold, out of 150, we'd previously only got 7. Now this time, when using Through Text in a number of branches, we eventually ended up with 69 branches over the threshold, and our average turnout for the first time, just rounding up a bit, hit 50%. That wasn't all down to Through Text. We made other changes. This was at the same time as Joe Grady had become General Secretary of UCU, and there were various other changes that we were making to our kind of campaigning, our more kind of top-down campaigning methods, emails, campaigning materials and stuff like that. But Through Text was a big element in that, and there was a correlation in terms of improvement in turnout between branches that used Through Text and branches that made it over the threshold. So we're continuing to use it now because, as you can probably guess from Emma's presentation, it's actually amazingly useful in the circumstances that unions are operating in right now, with lockdown or kind of semi-lockdown measures in place across the country, because there's no substitute for door knocking. But in our workplaces, for the most part, we're not in a position where we can knock on doors at the moment. We're also not in a position where we could phone members, maybe in their offices, if they're lucky enough to have an office where they can talk about union stuff. There are various other things that we usually try to do, or put posters up around the campuses we organise in, that we can't do at the moment. And yet, in our sectors that we represent, our members are facing quite unprecedented attacks on their jobs, basically, in terms of job cuts and redundancies. And we're using it right now on a local level, branch by branch, in places that are escalating towards industrial disputes over redundancies. What we've used it for, basically, is for kind of get the vote out and mobilization. So it's proved really useful for checking off people who have posted their postal ballots. You know, when I was a member of UCU, I used to go around my branch. Claire will talk about this a bit more, and maybe get 10 confirmed votes in 1 hour of door knocking. Whereas if you do a round of texting about the same time, you can get 100 confirmed votes back from your branch. So it gives you a massive kind of kickstart to that process of making sure people have voted. But we've also found it really useful, and our members have found it really useful for broader kind of organising purposes and for their own training as activists. So when you start these conversations with people about whether they voted in the ballot, it often leads you down paths that help you understand what your members' needs are, and help you understand how your own methods of organising can change. So a lot of people, when they send the text for the first time and get the replies back, they find, for instance, that loads of their members don't know that you have to hit a 50% threshold to be able to take industrial action. That's news to a lot of people. So there's a process of education that can take place through these conversations that's a lot faster than you can ever get by knocking on doors or phone banking. Or they don't know, for example, that it's the law that requires us to vote by post in industrial ballots, rather than the union just choosing to do that. So there are loads of things that you can use it to do to kind of bring your whole membership up to speed, and also for activists to educate themselves about what the level of understanding is in the branch that they're organising in of kind of the conditions the union is working in. What we haven't used it for so much is some of the stuff that Emma was sort of gesturing towards in her intro. We're just starting to think about how to use it for broader organising and campaigning purposes, like outside of industrial ballots, when we're trying to hit that threshold. You know, thinking about, could it be useful in a much more basic way, like kind of when a branch is setting its kind of campaigning agenda for the next year, you know, which issues really matter to our members and do we want to press management on? Is it the gender pay gap? Is it, you know, workload or whatever? Maybe they could text around their membership just with a much more open-ended introductory text message to say, you know, what are the 3 things that most matter to you in the workplace or whatever, and start the conversations and gather information that way. We haven't started doing that kind of thing yet, but that's the sort of direction that we're heading in as a union. I'll just finish by saying, you know, we've had a lot of help from the TUC to get this going, but we're now really keen to share what we've learned with other unions that are interested in, you know, improving the turnout that they get in industrial ballots or for any other purposes. So if you want to get in touch, you can email me. I'm going to put my email in the chat box. I'm hoping to hear from people, but I'll hand over to Claire for now to give the kind of members' perspective on how it's been working for us.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. Yeah, good. So I'm Claire Maris. I'm a member of UCU, which is Universities and Colleges Union in the UK. And I took part, in the pilot study that Nick mentioned. I think I was in the first group of people who tried it out with the support of Anthony Hayes from TUC, and it was he was extremely helpful. And it was amazing, and just amazing experience. You know, I went into it because I was asked as a volunteer, let's try this out, see what. And I have, I suppose, quite a negative preconception about texting people. You know, that it's just like, and we'd had a little bit of experience in our branch and then a couple of others of blast texting, where people were just sent a text, the same text to everybody, but there was no, you know, telling you that there was a ballot on and you should vote. But it wasn't, you couldn't, it was a no, you can't reply to those. It's just, so I was, you know, and I was a bit reluctant to this, and I hate getting any marketing, you know, phone calls or texts or anything or emails and like that. So I went into it a little bit reluctant, but I was totally blown away by the technology and the way. So I think Emma described it very well in terms of how it's not this bottom, you know, this top down one-to-many communication. It's not anonymous at all. You develop a personal, you know, you actually will develop a personal relationship with hundreds of people who you don't know through texting. And I was very surprised and found it actually quite a pleasant experience. And also the context is I had, just before I did this, spent hours and hours going around my campus. I work in university, going around my campus, trying to, we call it door knocking, but most of my colleagues work in open plan offices, which actually makes it quite hard to go up to people and say, well, are you a union member? And all their colleagues can hear the conversation. So that's quite awkward. And even if in places where you can knock on doors, most of the people aren't in their office. So the return on that was pathetically slow. I mean, I did a lot of it. And so once you find someone and you have the conversation, of course, then you've got a good one-to-one conversation with somebody and you can talk. But if anything, then you spend quite a lot of time with that person as well, which is sort of good, but takes time. So in terms of the return, getting people to confirm they'd voted, but also to ask questions. So one of the issues we had was, so Nick mentioned the two, is like not understanding how important 50% threshold was, not understanding that it was a postal vote and that they couldn't email it. So some of the responses was, I can't find the email to vote. And I said, no, it's a postal vote and it's not us that, and well, why is the union doing a postal vote and not an e-ballot? And you have to explain we're not allowed to because of so that educational thing was, I think, quite very useful for people who didn't know it already. And then replacement ballots. So some people hadn't got their ballots because they'd moved address, because their home address or their work address wasn't up to date on the system. So you could tell them how they could get a replacement ballot. So you could get them. So that the replacement ballot thing, I think, was probably the numbers, because of the timing when we were doing it, where we added numbers quite significantly. So people who sort of wanted to vote but hadn't received it and didn't know how to get a replacement, even though they had received many emails from the top-down emails from the union telling them about the ballot, telling them how to get a replacement ballot, they hadn't opened those emails. But when they got the text, we were able to communicate with them. And then they were just solidarity. Some of the people had already voted yes for industrial action, but sort of support, said, oh, thank you for doing this and everything. The only thing I would mention is that, so I think Emma said, you get a high return. I think Nick might have the numbers, but we were getting 30 to 50% responses within 24 hours, which I think is fantastic. And people can reply, obviously, when suitable for them. And you did get the odd, very annoyed person. Saying, why are you contacting me? I never gave you permission to contact me using my number. Who are you anyway? That kind of, so we did get some of those and they were quite upsetting, but they were, and they took emotionally quite a lot of effort, but they were a tiny proportion of the total number. And I think, and the same happens actually with face-to-face door knocking as well. As I've got, and I had to keep reminding myself, yes, but out of each one person who feels like that, there's 99 people who don't. And I think in some of the negative reactions were in places where they had the blast texting beforehand, and we didn't. And then it's like, well, I've already told you, or they've already had too much. So I think it's a question of managing to make sure that there's not multiple things going on at the same time. But I think UCU is now more aware of that. I think I'll stop there and answer questions. I think will be more useful.
Thank you very much for that, both of you. That's really interesting, and it is quite inspirational work there, how you've taken something on a very small pilot and then made it into something which you've learned from and then grown into to making a big change in the union. Emma, back over to you. You kind of tantalised us with the prospect of finding out more about some of the detail of how other unions might go about doing this kind of thing for themselves.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks for that. It was really fantastic case study. Really amazing. This is exactly what it's all about. It's about, supporting the union, the industrial strategy of the union. So yeah, massive well done to both of you and everyone who is involved. So yeah, I thought it'd be helpful to actually maybe try and just show you a little bit, what it actually looks like if you were running one of these text campaigns yourselves. Now, I'm going to share my screen, so if you just bear with me a moment and get that up and running. I hope everybody can see that okay. Okay, great. John is nodding, so I'll plow on. Okay, so I was explaining to the other panelists just before we got started, I've definitely gone for function over glamour with these PowerPoints, but I thought the most helpful thing would be for you to actually, you know, see what it would look like if you were running one of these yourself. So this first screen here is from the perspective, if you were a member or a volunteer who was sending these, who'd been signed up to be a text volunteer, and you've been assigned a bunch of numbers to text, this is what you would, you know, log in on a computer or your tablet or smartphone. I personally find it easiest on the computer myself, but you can do it on the app as well. And essentially what you'd have, if you see on the left-hand side of the screen, you've got the conversations bar, and there's a couple of numbers here. So Bree and Emily. Now you'd have a pre-written message that would have been written by the organizer. And you can see this is a demonstration here about an event that's happening on this Saturday in Oakland. And it's asking the person receiving if they're happy to come, if they're able to come along to volunteer. Now, obviously this can be whatever it is that you, whatever organising purpose you have for sending text messages. And what you would do is literally just press the send button and it would move on to the next person. So you'd send it to Bree, then you'd send it to Emily, click, 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 click. You could do 200 messages in a minute, approximately. Once you've done that, move on to the next slide. Okay, so now Bree has replied and has said, yeah, I'm interested. What are the event details? So you would then see this, it would come up just like this on your screen. And if you have a look on the right-hand side, you've got some recommended replies. So if the person replies saying that they're up for volunteering, there's a recommended will volunteer reply. You know, and obviously if there's a no, I can't this time, but maybe interested in the future, or no, you know, I'm not interested at all and please don't contact me again. In fact, actually the next slide will show you, you know, it's all GDPR compliant. You've got the opt-outs. So if somebody does say, you know, please don't contact me again, you can reply and say, you know, not to worry, we're going to remove you from the list. So you won't hear from us by this method again. Someone actually asked a question about GDPR compliance in the Q&A section. So and I think that was specifically around using petitions, people who've signed petitions to then be able to text them. So, you know, it's a really good question. And the key thing basically is the privacy policy that you put onto the petition. You just have to make sure that you've got it covered within the privacy policy, that you can continue to communicate with them about the ongoing activities of the union or the campaign. And obviously you have to have the opt-in for communication by phone as well as by email. So if you have the petition as GDPR compliant, then you can kind of go ahead and use this platform. But the platform itself enables you to, supports you to manage the data in a GDPR compliant way because it has the opt-out and it's all very easy to use. So as you know, as you're the organisers, I thought it would also be helpful to show you what it would look like if you were the admin. So, because some people might be concerned, well, you know, I like the idea of trusting volunteers to take on this stuff and I want my members to get involved, but what if they do something, what if someone goes rogue and does something wild and, you know, etc., 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 which is completely understandable concerns. But again, what's really good about this platform is that you have the checks and balances that are built in. So this is the admin screen, and if you see on the left-hand side, you've got this senders column. So Emily is one of the volunteer senders. So Emily is sending these messages. You can click on Emily and you can see all of the conversations that she's having. So you can check through that, you know, people are responding appropriately. Let's say that Emily she's launched all her messages and then people have replied, but Emily's gone off and has sort of forgotten to reply to the people's replies. You can reply on her behalf, and you can also reassign her numbers to other people. So it's very, very flexible, and it really it enables you as the organizer to remain in control of the whole process. So it's a great way of being able to give power and responsibility away to the membership, and to really involve them in a strategic and meaningful way in the campaign and in the organising effort, but without you know, in a way where all of the risks are mitigated. So I'm just going to quickly run through now. It should only take me a few minutes. I know this is very nuts and bolts, but I'm going to just run through how easy it would actually be for you to get set up. And just to say as well, we've been talking about through text today. You know, we don't work for through text, so there are other platforms. It just happens that this is a platform that I personally am most familiar with from my work, and also that the TUC has been piloting along with a number of other unions. There's another platform called Call Hub, which, you know, works in a very similar way, and there are, you know, other platforms on the market as well. So this is how straightforward it is. If you wanted to start one of these campaigns, the first thing you would need is a CSV file with the first and last name and the phone number of the people who you wanted to text. You can also include an email address as a way of matching up with your database. So yeah, you upload your CSV file. You create your campaign. So this might be for an event that you're organising. It might be for your strike ballot. It could be asking people to come and volunteer, or if they're interested in becoming reps, or, you know, whatever it is that you want to ask them. You create the campaign in here by filling in the boxes. You then choose your senders. So, you know, when Claire said, oh, okay, reluctantly, oh, fine, I'll join this texting team, then Claire would have been added to this campaign as a sender. And so, yeah, you would have recruited a handful of volunteers who are prepared to do this and have been through a training, and you would then add them here as the senders. You would then craft the initial message that you want to be sent out. And as you can see, you'd write hi and then click first name. This is sender first name, and this obviously enables you to be able to send out the same message to lots and lots of different people, but in a way that is personalized to them. And you preview the message below. The fifth step is that you then craft your recommended replies. So, you know, your yes, you know, your maybe, your leave me alone replies. And as I mentioned before, the volunteer who's sending out these messages can obviously tweak them to make sure that the relevant information is, that they're answering all of the specific questions. But this just helps to save a lot of time, so people aren't having to write individual replies for every message. This is where you'd create your survey questions. So this is the information that you want to collect back. So let's say you're doing your strike ballot. Have these people got their ballot papers? Have they voted? Are they planning to? You would record that information here. If you were recruiting volunteers, it would be like this one as on the example. Is this person going to volunteer? Yes, no, maybe. And it tags them, which you can then use that information, you know, back into the CRM or database system that you're using. And that is it. So from that point, you would then be ready to start your campaign. And you would be back up now at this first screen where you're ready to actually start launching the initial text messages. So yeah, just to kind of try and make it a bit more concrete, that is a whistle-stop tour of how you would how you would go about setting up a text campaign. And I hope you can see, like, it is really, you don't have to be some kind of super duper tech wizard, and if you did, I certainly wouldn't have been able to do it. So yeah, it's very user-friendly, it's very straightforward. Yeah, I will stop sharing my screen now and hand back over to John.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Emma. And that's really helpful. You say it's nuts and bolts, but I find that really tangible. That helps you see how it kind of fits into your own organisation. Oh yeah, my activists and organisers can work in that way, and that really brings it alive. Thank you very much. So we've got a bunch of questions on it. One thing that quite a few people have asked is around costs of it. Now, I'm quite attracted to this as a model because it kind of starts as small as you need to and then goes as big as you need to. But I wondered if, Nick, you were able to share any kind of details about how you'd thought about how you budgeted for this, in how you've been doing it and what you've been thinking about the returns, how any kind of thoughts around that. And Emma, if that is something that you factor into the kind of campaigns that you've been organising with other clients. So Nick, are you able to?
Yeah, happy to come in on that. Yeah, so basically with text, it varies from one service to the next. I think through text is one of the more expensive ones. It can work out about 10p per text message that you send. That's more expensive than a blast texting service of the kind that I mentioned, but only by a few pence. And there's also a bulk discount. So if you get up to 10,000, there's a percentage off, and 20,000 and so on. And for us, in terms of how we pay for it, we have a single central account with through text, which is kind of administered by UCU head office. So it's not individual branches paying for it. So we have that kind of control in budget terms, and in terms of, we have control in terms of where we target our use of the service to the branches that are going to benefit from it. Obviously, there are some UCU branches that are so good at getting over the threshold as it stands that they can maybe derive some benefit from it, but they're not going to be using it as much. They're not going to be giving it to them on as regular a basis. But we also compare it with, you know, before and still during the last few ballots we've paid people, not members either, but just temp staff, to do phone banking for us and call hundreds or thousands of people, and that's really expensive. So the more we can shift to this type of get the vote out activity, I think the more money we can save. And it's also, as Emma said, is so important for the way it kind of devolves some of the power and responsibility for organising members and getting the vote out to our active members in our branches. And they actually really appreciate that. It's been wildly popular for them. But it means, yeah, that the kind of the activity and the responsibility for getting a good turnout is spread throughout the union in a really even way. But I'm happy to answer more specific questions about costs and stuff like that if you want to drop me an email.
Yeah, I think that was a really comprehensive answer, Nick. I wouldn't really have anything else to add there, other than just that drop the website into the chat box, so it'd be worth having a look at the pricing options. Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess, Claire, from my perspective, having the it as something that the union is paying centrally makes it less of a concern for the branch to take up. Yeah. So one thing I'd like to say on costs is one thing that it's easy to make a mistake of is confusing the costs per unit with the cost per conversion. So you've always got to look at, yes, it costs me 0.1 pence to send an email versus 10 pence for this, but I've got to then work out that my email is opened regularly and read by 10% of the people who get it, will click through to it from it. And the impact of having that real person, that you're having a conversation with Claire Maris, not with do not reply at UCU, means that it has so much more personal impact. So I know there's one thing that's really important to try to measure as much as you can in these kind of projects is per contact, how many results are you getting? How many new ballot papers ordered? How many people having a conversation and registering that they have voted or that they are likely to vote? And from what I've seen with a lot of these projects, the numbers on that are way higher. The costs are higher per unit, but that means because they're effective. And that's doubly important when you're looking at a time sensitive problem like a strike ballot, where we've got to get the volume done quickly, and where, as Nick said, the difference between 42% and 50% is the difference between 7 and 69. Getting over that 50% means an awful lot to a lot of people. So yeah, we always have to be realistic about our costs. But really work out, and it's good that you should be on top of measuring this and monitoring this, because otherwise you can let your digital costs run away with you and not understand what you're paying for. But you need to be measuring the right thing. You need to be measuring not the contacts, but the results from it, I think. So no, that is that's really helpful. Thanks. I've had another question here around change management in these kind of projects, where you're getting people to come with you in doing something that is quite different, as Claire has already alluded to, in terms of different ways of working, and you may be getting pushback from parts of the organisation. Any thoughts on how you get people to pick up some really new ways of working? Who's up for answering that one? Claire?
Hi, now I can just say a little bit. What I found, so my personal experience, but also, so there was a group of us doing it in that pilot. Every single person who did it really enjoyed it. So actually had, found it quite a really rewarding and fun experience, and very easy. The other thing I think I saw a message, maybe it is incredibly, it takes 5 minutes to learn how to do it. I mean, the slides that Emma showed, that's it. It's not more complicated than that. I mean, obviously I was at the volunteer end, not at the organizer end, but so it's very easy to learn. And then, and I certainly felt so much more ownership as well than of the ballot result. It made me more excited about the ballot being successful, and then ownership about the fact that it had been successful. And so I think that and I know in my branch, and I think it's typical, that only a small number of people were willing to go door knocking, just, the time wise, the vulnerability, the ones who were feeling less secure, I could afford it in different ways. But if you don't have the time and you're scared about being seen as an organizer in that such a visible way, it's so much easier to do this. That I think you can get more people involved and feeling involved in the campaign that you're organizing, and it's fun.
Yeah, if I could just add, yeah, I think everything Claire is really true. In terms of the politics of how we negotiated rolling out to branches from head office, once people have done it, they love it, and there's no looking back. We made sure that our training materials were as good as possible, so that people could get a sense of how it worked if they were a little bit uncertain or wavering. Our members are used to being texted by UCU regional or head offices or head office, and branches are used to that happening whether they've asked for it or not. So I think that kind of gives us a way in that they're kind of expecting it. There were cases where branches would say to us, yeah, we're not sure we can help you with it. Like, we're not sure we can provide the volunteers to do the texting, either because we don't have time or they're a bit skeptical about it at first. But in those cases, we didn't have any branch that said, do not text our members. So we reserved the right to just kind of go over the top of them where necessary from head office, and maybe get some volunteers in from other branches sometimes. It's also a way of building inter-branch solidarity and getting conversations going between members in different branches. We would do that, and then we would go to them and say, look, you beat the threshold or whatever, it works really well. So let's, make sure that if we plan ahead a bit more next time, you've got some volunteers ready to do it. And there hasn't really been any kind of concerted resistance to it. It's probably a really rare example of an initiative that's equally popular with unions, full-time staff and its members at the same time.
That's a really nice answer, Nick, and it really feeds into some of the stuff that we've been looking at in the digital lab at the TUC, in what are the kind of behaviours that unions need to be exhibiting, and the kind of culture change that we need to make a success of these kind of products. And you've got two really good parts of that there. You didn't suddenly switch on a system that you say the whole union is now using this, and you like it or lump it. You kind of went to the branches that you thought would really get it, that where it was timely and people could respond, worked with people who wanted to work, and trialed something. So often we have this thing in the digital lab about how you build a skateboard. So you want to get someone from A to B. You can either design a car and spend 5 years building a car and have people frustrated that they can't get anywhere for 5 years until you've delivered it to them. Or you can, in a month's time, give them a skateboard. In 2 months' time, you can revise it and give them a bicycle. You can work your way in small steps towards where you want to be. That way you learn as you're going, and you get over a lot of the political and organizational problems that you will get as you do it. So what's the smallest project that you can test this in? And for Nick and Joe kind of coming to us originally about, we've got a couple of branches, we can do something around a very short time scale, and then let's see where it goes from there. And the other thing is the power of a good example, where you get people enthused about showing this works really, really well. That branch did this brilliantly. Look at the result they've got. You want that too, don't you? And then it becomes a much easier sell-in. Emma, I don't know if there's anything that you'll be able to add in about how coming as a kind of outsider into organizations with these wonderful new tools, how you would go about selling in a project and getting everybody to work with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'd really reiterate what Claire and Nick have said, in the sense that starting small with a pilot case and being able to demonstrate the returns from that and the impact of that, and then using that, as the test case really to build further support. And I think also just that understanding, I completely understand people's kind of hesitation really to like try something new, because everybody's investing a lot of time, a lot of voluntary time. There's an understandable desire in some ways to be kind of a bit resistant to trying something that might seem like a fad, and then you invest a bunch of time in it and then it doesn't quite work, and you go back to the good old fashioned way of doing it. Totally understandable, kind of headspace to be in. But I think that with the eyes on the prize of particularly, say in a strike ballot situation, it's where we've been able to see that this tactic, in the UCU example, has been incredibly powerful, and central to that being successful. You can, use that and extrapolate from that and learn from that. And I think trying to develop that learning culture is fundamental, right, for the trade union movement to be able to, grow and become stronger in the way that we need it to. So yeah, starting small and building upwards from there.
Brilliant, thank you very much. We've got a few people asking about the presentation, if they can access some of this stuff afterwards. And yes, we'll be trying to get through the videos as much as we can and republish stuff. If you want to stay up with any more of this as it comes, digital.tuc.org.uk is where we're publishing most of our digital stuff. One question around, is this something that the TUC should build its own platform for? And with pricing for unions and campaign groups. This is one, I think there is a real role for platforms in unions. I think one thing that we've got as a complete strength is what both Nick and Emma just alluded to, about being a movement, learning from each other, sharing in a way that commercial organizations and NGOs don't instinctively have, which we shouldn't do. I don't think in many ways that building our own software is always the way to go. Sometimes it certainly is. big systems take a huge amount of effort to keep in a professional system. One early failure I've made in my job at the TUC many years ago was developing a branch system for branch websites, which we rolled out to 4 big unions, and we then had to keep up how you develop the functions of a website system as they developed in the outside world. Suddenly, someone launched a product called WordPress, which was a off-the-shelf, grab it, best-of-breed website tool, and we were obsolete in minutes. I don't think that's the kind of platform that we can build. The platform that I'm really excited about is what we're trying to do with our Megaphone tool, megaphone.org.uk, where unions can use it to build and run their own campaigns. We've used it, as Emma talked about in the Bakers Union case, to gather the McStrike information that we then use to feed into this kind of stuff. The value of that platform is the community, the ownership of it in the movement, rather than just us building the best of breed tool. So yes, I think there's a brilliant value in us coming together as unions to share and build. At the moment, I think tools like this, they're still so fluid, they're still changing all the time, and they're not that expensive to run. I really think it's probably one that we keep unions pointing them at some good suppliers and sharing the examples so people can get through to them quicker. Brilliant. So thank you. We've had some really nice comments through all the time in this, and it's clear that people have kind of really valued what you guys have had to say, and we'll be following this one. I think it's going to be a gigantic tactic for unions, just because it takes the best of what we do, which is about the relationships and people supporting people, and it lets us do it at scale, which is what we're going to need to do if we're going to reach out and grow the movement. So it's something that's really exciting for me. I'm thrilled to see the work that you've been doing at UCU, and I'm going to follow everything that Social Practice are up to with other clients around the world on this. Thank you very much, all of you, for participating, and everybody else for coming along to this session. Been really appreciated, and I've really loved learning from you. Cheers. Have a good afternoon.